everybody, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and welcome to Zen Who, where I tackle each individual Doctor Who serial and ponder whether I'll be done with the Hartnell era before I'm 35. Considering my track record with History of One Piece, it's unlikely, but stranger things have happened around here. In any event, it's been some time since our last episode, so in case you're just joining in, allow me to quickly recap our journey thus far. We began our adventure with a brief look at the series as a whole, told from the perspective of my friends who grew up with Doctor Who and knew a lot more about it than I do. Our first official episode focused on the first Doctor with his first adventure, Unearthly Child, a 4-part serial which introduced us to the Doctor himself, as well as his granddaughter Susan and his companions Ian and Barbara. It had an amazing first episode, with the other 3 being just okay. Afterwards, we discussed the Daleks, a 7-part serial which introduced the titular villains and which I found to be highly enjoyable despite some pacing and character issues in places. Today we're taking a look at the final serial from the Beginnings collection. Let's just hope that there are no misprint issues like with my previous copy of the Daleks. In any event, let's take a look at the Edge of Destruction. The Edge of Destruction is unique from the previous 2 serials in terms of length, as it only has 2 episodes, making it the shortest serial thus far. This is a distinction it would hold until Mission to the Unknown from Doctor Who's 3rd season, although the Season 2 serial, The Rescue, also clocks in at 2 episodes. Believe it or not, the serial's length and existence itself stems from a bit of uncertainty from just a month before the show's debut. You see, Doctor Who was slated for 48 half-hour episodes which were being produced by Verity Lambert. Lambert had been Sidney Newman's production assistant back at his old job at Armchair Theatre, and Newman brought her on board to produce Doctor Who. This was a prestigious role for a young woman back then, and while she was initially only seen as just a second fiddle to the head of serials, Donald Wilson, she took charge of her position and commanded respect. The initial confusion began when the pilot of the show had to be completely reshot following numerous technical issues behind the scenes that I detailed in my review of Unearthly Child. This meant that they had to budget for another episode entirely, and film reel was super expensive back then. The TARDIS set was also proving to be exceedingly more expensive than they budgeted for, as the doors and console had to be fixed after the problems in the first episode. As such, Verity received a notice from Donald Baverstock that the show was only being given 4 episodes at this time, as it was becoming exceedingly costly to produce. This conflict came to a head when Verity Lambert was called to a meeting with Joanna Spicer, Assistant Director of Planning for Programs at BBC. Verity sat down and explained that she had budgeted for 48 half-hour episodes, and if done correctly, they would make back their budget despite the cost of the TARDIS and the wardrobe. They made a deal to fix the budget for future episodes, but this meant that Doctor Who was only being given a grace period of 13 episodes, with the following 13 episodes being dependent on the success of the initial batch. Because of this, it was decided that a 2-episode filler would be required in case the show was not renewed for any further episodes. In essence, Doctor Who in the 60s suffered from a lot of the same issues that plague anime seasons today. David Whittaker was assigned as the writer for the serial and finished the script in only 2 days. Having no budget for the serial and working off of minimal resources, Whittaker took advantage of the situation to write a character-driven story confined to the TARDIS, exploring its facets more thoroughly. With all that being said, let's dive into the Edge of Destruction and see if it holds up despite its rushed development. The core plot of The Edge of Destruction is understandably quite simple, but I think what works about it is how they utilized a simple plot to their advantage. Because they didn't have the budget for entirely new sets, they instead took the opportunity to expand upon the TARDIS itself. We've basically been bouncing around from place to place, and while we have had some character development, we haven't had much time to address many of the events that happened previously. With this in mind, the serial revolves around the TARDIS itself, as an explosion occurs just as they are leaving the planet of Skaro from the Daleks. We aren't certain at first if the explosion occurs in or outside the TARDIS, however, not only does it incapacitate our heroes for the time being, but it also traps them inside the TARDIS for the foreseeable future. On a side note, this is now the second time they've all been knocked out during a standard trip in the TARDIS. I'm beginning to think this craft isn't very safe to operate, or perhaps the Doctor has no idea what he's doing.
Oh shit! Oh fuck!
After taking some time to recover from yet another series of concussions that gives everyone memory loss for a brief period of time, the Doctor and his companions try to assess what's going on. Strange things begin to happen around the TARDIS with seemingly no explanation. Susan is shocked by the control panel and is taken to a new part of the ship with a set of beds where she can rest. Ian grabs some water from a machine in this new room, which is also strange because the machine reads as empty even though it's fully stocked. The Doctor and Ian examine the fault locator on the TARDIS, but nothing appears to be wrong with the internal workings of the ship, even though the doors were wide open when they awoke from the explosion, and they keep closing every time they try to leave. Also, when they activate the scanner outside, all it shows are photographs of past adventures. It's quite clear something is wrong, but the true mystery of this two-parter is the cause of all these strange events. After an admittedly slow start to the first episode, the thing that gripped me when watching this serial for the first time is this uncertainty. You don't quite know what's happening, but there's all these hints and clues that lead you to speculate various different things. Is it possible something snuck inside the TARDIS with them? It would certainly explain why Susan starts to behave very strangely, grabbing a pair of scissors to protect herself and lashing out at Ian and Barbara. Could she be possessed by some alien creature? Or is it just shock from being electrocuted by the control panel and her earlier concussion? If there's nobody else in the TARDIS that we can see, why are the doors malfunctioning, and why hasn't the ship raised an alarm? The suspense is key in these two episodes, and they keep you guessing as time goes on. Or rather, as time stops, because the clock in the TARDIS begins to melt, and their watches stop ticking. Time is taken away from them, and both Ian and the Doctor have to decide who is to blame and how to deal with this deadly situation. From this point onward, I will be discussing spoilers for The Edge of Destruction. I know I haven't done any spoiler sections for Zen Who up until now, however, The Edge of Destruction really deserves to be watched spoiler-free, or at least skip to this time code to avoid spoiling the mystery for yourself. At the end of the episode, it's revealed that the Doctor had used the fast return switch on the TARDIS in order to bring them back to London. Upon further inspection, they find that the fast return switch itself is stuck because the spring has come off the base. Because the spring is still attached to the computer bank, the TARDIS thinks it's still being pressed down, so it has taken them further and further into the past, all the way back to the birth of a new solar system. The explosion at the beginning was caused by the first of many explosions from the birth of a sun and its planets. Sensing the danger this posed to the TARDIS, a defense mechanism activated which froze the ship in time for a brief period while giving the Doctor clues pointing to the source of the problem. The empty light on the water machine was part of it, showing that soon the ship would have no water if nothing was done, while the pictures shown on the scanner are a hint that they are going back in time to a point of destruction. After fixing the spring on the switch, the TARDIS reactivates once more, and they are free to land, although now they have no idea when or where they are once more. To be perfectly honest, I think this explanation is an exceedingly clever way to end the mystery. For the most part, everything wraps up nicely and ties together with all the clues brought up throughout the serial. While there are several red herrings, none of these possible solutions take away from the final answer. These are just possible theories, and while there are a few of them, they are never overwhelming, and they all fit on with the clues established as well. I do have some minor issues, but I think this mystery, its clues, the red herrings, and the answer all work far better than I was expecting for a story that was rushed to production. The core plot and mystery are really the heart and soul of the serial, and I think that works wonderfully for the most part. With that being said, let's discuss those issues. The biggest one I have is how much of the first episode is just dedicated to them recovering from their concussions. They spend a good 8.5 minutes focusing on the characters having memory issues, and that is a lot when you realize that this is about 1/8 of the entire serial. Some of it works well, like explaining why they aren't able to properly respond to the problems in front of them, and why they so readily suspect each other of sabotage, but half of it is just padding to extend the episode length. It's rather boring for a bit, and had me worried until the plot kicked in immediately afterwards. This is my largest issue with the story, and it certainly feels like they didn't quite have enough material for a full 2-part serial. I just wish that it wasn't the beginning, since that is the most important time to hook me into the episode. My other complaints are minor when it comes to the story, but I do think they are worth noting. In the behind-the-scenes documentary on the DVD, William Russell felt that the ultimate explanation for the TARDIS malfunction was a bit too ordinary. We have all of these extraordinary things happen, and it's all because of one faulty spring. While I do think the explanation is quite clever, having it just be a spring takes away from the mystique of the episode a bit. In addition to this, while the explanation itself is told rather well, it can get a bit confusing at first when they're listing out the clues and how time was taken away from them. It's a lot going on, and while it is far easier to piece together than, say, the alternative factor, it does benefit from multiple viewings to see just what they're getting at. Finally, I do think a couple plot threads are just abandoned way too quickly. They set up the sabotage angle incredibly well and have Ian and the Doctor suspicious of each other, only to have them work together once the fault indicator lights up entirely. They set up the idea of something being in the ship really damn well, but they drop it just as quickly when the sabotage angle takes over. It's not bad, and it does service the suspense and the mystery, but it does feel like the resolutions of these conflicts are rushed in both cases. Overall though, The Edge of Destruction does incredibly well with the plot they put together. Again, this was cobbled together at the last minute with duct tape and sheer determination, and even with the issues I mentioned, I highly enjoyed my time watching it. It is highly engaging, and the short length makes many of my issues not matter quite as much as previous serials, especially considering they had far more problems with this than they ever did with the Daleks. Again, Whitaker described working on this episode as a bit of a nightmare, but I ended up pleasantly surprised with how it turned out. However, where this serial truly shines is in how it challenges these characters and how it brings them together. In previous serials, the characters were strangers traveling from place to place, and while they had moments of development, a large portion was focused on them learning about their surroundings and trying to get a read on one another. The Edge of Destruction puts these characters in a very precarious situation and uses this to not only advance their development, but bring resolution to the conflicts from before. However, before I delve into this development, I want to discuss a character that was formally introduced in this episode, the TARDIS itself. Whereas previously we had just thought of the TARDIS as a device with no will or mind of its own, it's here where we start to learn more about the ship and get hints that the TARDIS itself is alive. The Doctor writes it off in this episode as a machine that isn't thinking like a human intelligence, but more as a machine would think, but we begin to suspect here that there is more to the TARDIS than even he knows. That's really intriguing for me and sets up one of the core tenets of his character. The Doctor may have traveled in it for a long time, but he doesn't know everything about his ship. Why is that? This question will be answered later on, but it is interesting to me nonetheless because it tells us more about his character. In addition to this, we start to learn more about how the TARDIS operates. While the ship has a bank of computers that handle the basic operations, the control panel is quite large and seems designed for multiple users. If something goes wrong on the control panel or another part of the ship, a fault indicator lights up to show the problem. This ship is designed for multiple people to use and for people to live in for long periods of time. Finally, we also learn that the TARDIS has an internal power source that is contained by the central pillar, and that's the reason why it moves up and down when traveling through time. It is unclear at this point whether the power source has a mind of its own or if that is the intelligence of the TARDIS itself, but there is a point in the episode where the power source tries to escape and the pillar lowers without any power, implying a central intelligence inside the ship. I have to say, I love all this new info we got about the TARDIS and further exploration of the interior of the ship. For the past 11 episodes, the TARDIS was just a MacGuffin, but by making it a character in its own right, we start to want to learn more about it and how it functions. I think this was a fantastic idea, and in the end, I keep theorizing how certain things work in the TARDIS, especially given how Modern Who takes these points and rolls with them like in Eccleston and Tennant's eras. Speaking of continuity, there is something I want to bring up. While Doctor Who has been known to play fast and loose with its continuity, there is still a lot of continuity, and it does carry over to Modern Who, to an extent. I've talked to Amanda Hagen and she says that some things contradict Classic Who, but there is continuity there. This brings up a point that fans made during my Star Trek Season 1 review. Several people mentioned to me that continuity just wasn't a thing during the age of Star Trek. However, that is expressly contradicted by The Edge of Destruction, which came out earlier. This serial is nothing but continuity, dealing with the fallout of everything that came before and expressly referencing the caveman and the Daleks during the first episode. We even see a new planet mentioned called Quinnis that the Doctor says they journeyed to 4 or 5 trips ago, expanding the mythos further and giving the idea that the Doctor has traveled many times before and has a history. Continuity existed back then, and it was important to the direction of this show. It's certainly possible that not following continuity was an American thing, but I honestly think the direction of both shows was simply different. It comes back to an analogy I made in that review. I feel that Star Trek takes a lot of influence from theater since it is a very theatrical focused production. However, I always feel like Doctor Who takes more influence from radio. The BBC was known as radio with pictures, and the focus on long-form stories was their forte. While they brought in Sydney Newman as new blood to break away from that image, in many ways it was still being produced as a radio drama. I'm not saying Doctor Who doesn't have theater influences either, but it's far more held back when it comes to acting than Trek was, and I think it really shows in this serial. Instead of going over the top with theater projection, they turn in very subtle performances that I believe are some of the best so far in the show. With that said, let's take a look at these characters and their performances during the serial. Let's start with the Doctor, who takes a bit of a backseat during this serial since he's unconscious for a large portion and is the most thoroughly concussed. I think part of this is due to the age of the Doctor, but it takes him longer to recover, and it's up to the companions to piece together the mystery. A large part of his arc for this serial is learning that humans have value and that it's okay to rely on others for help. Most of this is because he's still being challenged by Ian and Barbara, but I think a large part is when Barbara reminds him of how they saved him in the Cave of Skulls and that it was his fault they were captured in the Daleks. Barbara really puts him on blast in this episode, and I think that is a big factor in the Doctor starting to change. He still is suspicious of his companions since he was sneaky in the Daleks, and he expects them to do the same in return. He's an alien, and many of the laws and behaviors of human beings are alien to him as well. The Doctor is a creature of logic and uses his intellect to get him out of problems, but because of his nature, he doesn't see the value of interaction with human beings. Ian simply can't keep pace with him no matter how hard he tries, and the Doctor sees this as a weakness. However, both Ian and Barbara prove to him that humans can outsmart him in different ways. With Ian, he incorrectly thinks that they sabotage the controls and are only acting shocked, but when Ian takes the electrical shock for the Doctor, he sees just how valuable Ian is with his daring and compassion. At the end of the episode, Hartnell stammers an apology, but Ian cuts him off, saying that he can read every thought going through the Doctor's head. It's a wonderful moment where for once they are equals, and I highly enjoyed it. Also, Barbara proved her value by being the one to figure out the clues were a warning from the TARDIS with her out-of-the-box thinking, and Ian proved his by saving the Doctor and discovering that it was the fast return switch at fault. Barbara had to challenge the Doctor far more than ever before, and the subtle acting that Jacqueline Hill brings to this performance really sells it. Barbara is shown here to have out-of-the-box thinking since she's the one suggesting that something got into the TARDIS. Now, I don't specifically think it's illogical to think that something got into the TARDIS if the doors were open. However, those could just be the inside doors, since I do know the TARDIS has protections in place to keep invaders out. So when the Doctor says it's impossible and Ian agrees, I may be skeptical, but it does make sense. I love Barbara not really forgiving the Doctor, but agreeing to try to understand him. His plan to slip them a sleeping drug was done in order to gain control of a situation that he thought he understood. It was all perfectly logical, but Barbara showed him that there is value in not using logic all the time. I do hope they continue this thread with Barbara and the Doctor, but I highly enjoyed these exchanges and how the Doctor has begun to change into a character that cares about humanity. As for Ian, this is more an end to his previous arc. He spent the previous 2 serials trying to take charge and outthink and outpace the Doctor. He wants to be the leader of the group, and he contributes a lot to keeping them together, but he just can't keep up with the experience and knowledge of the Doctor. Ian learns in this episode that he doesn't have to. Instead, he can use his humanity and empathy to win over the Doctor. It's a nice change of pace, and having Ian and Barbara save the day for once is very refreshing. The person with the least amount of development is Susan, but that's because she's concussed and shocked during the episode and has to act stranger than usual to make the audience think she's possessed by an alien intelligence. To be perfectly honest, I think Carol Ann Ford has the best acting and best moments in these 2 episodes. The subtle change in tone to her voice and inflection is wonderfully done and can easily be interpreted as either shock and concussion or something far more sinister. Fun fact, Verity Lambert got complaints about Susan using scissors as a weapon and regrets the decision to include that scene, but I think it was entirely necessary to get the audience's attention. It gripped me from that moment and stuck with me long afterwards. With that being said, while I do love Hartnell as the Doctor, he is constantly flubbing his lines. I'm not just talking about once per episode. I counted around 4 or 5, not counting ones that were meant to be flubbed slightly. While Hartnell was a famously good actor, he unfortunately suffered from cerebrovascular disease, which made it difficult for him to retain information the more time passed. In order to help Hartnell out, William Russell and the rest of his companions would often take over parts of his lines and change them so they worked in the script. However, this serial requires a lot from Hartnell, and they didn't have the budget to do any more takes. This unfortunately meant that a lot of line flubs made it through. Now, I do think that it mostly works for this serial since the Doctor is supposed to be concussed. However, it happens too often for my taste, and by the end of the 2nd episode, it became distracting. With that being said, Hartnell's speech at the end of the 2nd episode is legendary as he describes the formation of planets and starts to laugh and get giddy just thinking about it. It is some of the best acting I've ever seen from him and shows why he was chosen for the part. In terms of presentation, The Edge of Destruction is the best serial thus far. For a serial that takes place entirely in one location, they managed to really keep the atmosphere tense and fresh. At many times, this felt like a horror film given the camera work. The soundtrack also echoes this sentiment with eerie, haunting music that feels alien in nature and keeps you on the edge of your seat. Even the lighting stands out, as there are points where the TARDIS has to power down, like when the Doctor delivers his legendary speech. Here, the console is powered down, giving him some fantastic atmosphere, and then, when the TARDIS powers back on, it is full of wonder. I gotta give kudos to the production team for making this episode look and feel great in such a short amount of time. Overall, I think The Edge of Destruction is a wonderful serial despite all the problems behind the scenes and the rushed development. It's not a perfect serial by any stretch of the imagination, but the suspenseful story and wonderful characterization really added to the lore of Doctor Who. Personally, I give it a Kana stamp of approval. I was thinking about my rating on this one for a while, and while I wanted to give it a plus, ultimately I decided the flaws hold it back a bit too much. The story starts off way too slow, the line flubs are distracting, the resolution is a bit rushed, and there are some confusing moments near the end. Still, despite my issues and my rating, I consider this to be a classic just as much as the Daleks, and better in some aspects. It held my attention most of the way through, and it stuck with me long after I finished it. Now, before we wrap things up for today, I figured that we'd start up a brand new segment on Zen Who that I like to call Timeless Tidbits. Every few episodes, we'll discuss new behind-the-scenes info that I've either missed or doesn't fit with any singular serial. First of all, The Edge of Destruction was helmed by two separate directors, Richard Martin for the first episode and Frank Cox for the second. Honestly, I didn't notice at first, but the horror aesthetic camera work is mostly present in the first episode, and I have to say, Richard Martin did a wonderful job with the suspense. Frank Cox did great as well, but his focus was on lighting and atmosphere, which did come through in spades. When it came to the TARDIS, Carol Ann Ford was actually the one who came up with the name, as they were only referring to it as the ship until she created the shorthand for time and relative dimension in space, creating one of the core tenets of the show. Coming back to Newman, while he was brought in to breathe new life into the BBC, he was also brought in because the BBC were considered too highbrow and he hadn't read Dickens or any of the major authors at the time. They wanted someone to appeal to the common crowd, and in this case, it worked. When it came to casting the companions, children were not considered at first because
children aren't interested in kids younger than themselves.
Yeah, I don't get it either. Newman changed this by adding in a child companion that could make mistakes and get in trouble. There was also originally meant to be a different serial to follow the pilot of the show, with Newman planning a giant themed story where characters would be shrunken down and interact with giant objects a bit like the Borrowers. It was scrapped because it was thin on plot, leading to the cavemen being used instead. It does explain why the pilot has a different feel from the following 3 episodes when the pilot was a bit grander. Verity also explained she had difficulty doing the cavemen with a straight face and would not have commissioned the cavemen as the first serial if given the choice. Additionally, Verity explained that Newman hated the titles and title music for Doctor Who when he first saw it, and apparently, Sydney thought of firing Verity and director Waris Hussein because of the first episode coming out bad. I'm still trying to process how he hated the opening theme song of the show, hated the Daleks, hated the titles, and ultimately kept pushing to make this show more educational and boring.
It's too scary for the kids.
I thought we were trying to scare them.
Scare them, not traumatize them.
Finally, it's worth noting that William Hartnell himself was originally wary about the role of the Doctor, not wanting to be typecast as a tough guy character, but ended up falling in love with him the more he read. Waris described Hartnell as prickly and cautious, very much like the character he portrayed, which worked out really great. With all of that being said, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and we have finally completed the Doctor Who Beginning Collection. I'm pleasantly surprised by how well this is holding up and how much behind the scenes info is available for this series. There have been some setbacks, but now Doctor Who is about to move away from the experimental phase and into something far more stable. but we will discuss this further when we get to the next serial, Marco Polo. All 3 versions of it, which I will explain in the next episode. In any case, if you like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that you too can join the Bun Squad, my legion of cute, fluffy bunnies that enjoy my videos. And while you're here, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Special thanks to Raichu Overlord Ben, Kyle Huxtable, James Bevan, and Seraphim for supporting the channel already. Another reminder that if you donate $20, you'll have a chance to request a movie, game, TV show, or anime of your choosing for me to review on the Bun Squad. And as always, don't forget to hit that bell so that you can get notified of every new video. Have a good one, everybody!
Ugh! Damn Philip! Trying to butt his nose and ask me that. Oh, what is your deal, Chiaki? I don't get why you're being so passive-aggressive, Chiaki. Well, maybe I wouldn't be passive-aggressive if I wasn't so sure that Mother left because of me. What if she found out who we really are? What would that mean for her? She can't handle that kind of thing. That's why I'm being so passive-aggressive, you stupid Australian! What are you doing, Chiaki? Philip's done nothing wrong, and yet you're taking it out on him. I get it. I really do. I know why he'd be suspicious of us. But he can't find out. Not when he could tell Mother. I just want... Yes, Kana. Is everything alright?
Well, there's still no sign of Mommy, so I'm gonna file that as a no. But anyway, I've been looking all over for you. Where have you been? I went to the TARDIS, but it was just Phil in there calling a bunch of Mommy's friends.
Yeah, he really is wasting his time, isn't he? I mean, if we don't know where Mother is, then why would her completely ordinary friends know anything about her whereabouts, right?
I guess. Then again, I wouldn't say the voice actor of Duke Nukem is ordinary. Even still, I really think he's trying his best all the same. It's amazing that Mommy has been able to get close to someone like him.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Wait, what do you mean by close?
Huh? You don't see it, Chibi?
See what?
Oh, come on! You have to notice the way they look at each other sometimes, and the way that they talk funny whenever they're around each other.
You know, Kana, it's possible to be good friends without being quote-unquote close.
Maybe, but don't you think it's strange how Phil just suddenly decides to start hanging around here more and more?
Oh, so now you're raising an eyebrow to that.
Yeah, but not for the same reasons as you were. Think, Chibi. Have you seen Phil here in the mornings a little too often? He's also stayed in the TARDIS some nights after we've gone to sleep. Shouldn't he be getting back to Australia? He's gonna get plane delayed.
Jet lagged.
Whatever! And don't even make me bring up that time we were watching the Pony Show. Man, I love Pinky so much! It's like she speaks my language, you know?
Yeah, it's not hard to see that.
Yep, that's for sure. Hey Kana, real quick, which one do you ship Pinky with?
Ooh, that's a toughie. Let me think. Probably Twilight for how much she reminds me of Mommy.
Huh? I'm not that much like Twilight.
I don't know, Zen. Shoves herself into her work, is stuck cleaning everyone's shit. Real cute when she's being smart.
Hey.
Wait, what?
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing. Just forget what I said.
I'm just saying that I know when love is in the air. And Phil and Mommy absolutely have that energy.
I think you're grasping for straws, Kana. And anyway, he may be close to her, but he has no good reason to be as nosy as he's being about everything. Just because he knows Mother, that doesn't give him the right to keep asking baseless questions.
Did something happen between you and Phil?
Oh please, when there's something not happening between us. Just don't worry about it, Kana. It's hardly the time to focus on that anyway.
Oh God, you're right! What am I doing? We need to keep looking for Mommy, Chibi. I'm sure there's some places we still haven't checked yet. Does she go to any bars that night? What theater does she go to? Oh, who am I kidding? We have a theater! Oh, Mommy, where are you? Come on, Chibi, we need to find her as soon as possible.
Yes. Just stay calm, Kana. It's no help getting so worked up about it. Let's go back to the TARDIS and search some more locations. Philip can keep wasting his time on the phone for all I care. The two of us can take care of the search. We are her OG assistants, after all.
Damn straight we are. Quick, let's go. I I don't want to be apart from Mommy for one more second.
Sorry, Kana. It isn't fair that you don't know as much as I do. Please forgive your selfish sister. We'll find her and bring her back safe and sound. Please, Mother. Please be safe.